Hi, everybody. Welcome to our new episode. This is brought to you by the Institute of Metaphysical Science, located at scientificmetaphysics.org, where you can see all of our programs and also all the materials that are available. Today's conversation is all about communicating effectively with those who do not agree with us in this polarized world. Why is it that we adhere to our opinions and beliefs and everything else, and we can't tolerate anybody that doesn't particularly have the same opinion that we do or the same belief that we do or what we know to be true? So we're going to take a look at this from the scientific metaphysic point of view. So welcome, Betty.
You're a big help.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I was watching or listening to one of Mrs. Laird's seminars, and she talked about, or she had discussion with one of the participants on the subject of listening. And I was very interested in the point they were making, which was that if you are listening, fully listening, like 100% there, listening to the ideas being presented, the listener actually shapes the conversation, not the speaker. I thought that was a fascinating observation, because we tend to think that what somebody is saying is what they actually believe.
Yeah.
And we don't, maybe. Or we get into a duel with what they think, what I think, what he thinks, what she thinks. And actually, what we're listening to and listening for is the presence of intelligence functioning.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are really listening for that idea to be presented, we'll find it coming all around us. When we take offense or take issue with something that's being discussed, we are giving it the resistance that holds it in place.
Mm-hmm.
And so it will hang around as long as we are putting energy on it in any form.
So what you're basically saying then is, if there's a conversation we're having, the other person has a completely opposite point of view about something, and we what is it that riles up in us that's unable to listen to or hear what that other point of view is?
It's called human self-righteousness.
Okay, so it's our own self-righteousness that's unwilling to listen to the other point of view. Is that, I'm just trying to see what's going on in that makeup of, I have it this way in the world, you have it that way in the world, and how do you loosen that up?
Well, number one, if you're being a metaphysician at all, you're not a two-legged animal with a point of view. And neither is anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're looking at are ideas. And since ideas are impersonal, it's not my idea or your idea. These are all ideas we're exploring. You can set aside the personal attachment stuff.
Easier said than done.
Very much easier said than done. But the reason that it's not easy is because we're so attached to our two-legged point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And being attached to your two-legged point of view, you are not open to ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So ideas are always present. And an idea whose time has come, it's going to show up. I've been able to see many times where something that I totally did not agree with turned out to be the wake-up call that got me on board with something I needed to pay attention to.
Right.
So there is that aspect too. So we want to live ourselves kind of sitting loose in the saddle. You want to live yourself humanly so that you recognize when your personality is intruding on your freedom.
Mm-hmm. I like that, to recognize when your personality is intruding on your freedom.
Mm-hmm. So when an idea is present, to be open to looking at it, you almost have to set aside your strong feelings of right and wrong, good and bad, all that. Because with those in front of you, you cannot see the idea and all the possibilities the idea may include.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a matter of freeing yourself, but really listening to the idea is different than listening to some person. Somebody may be speaking.
Yeah.
But your listening is not to them, it's to the idea being presented. And when you listen to the idea, all kinds of things can open up.
Mm-hmm.
But more interestingly to me was that if I'm listening to the idea from the standpoint of the source and condition of the idea is no different than the source and condition that has me occur.
Mm-hmm.
There's just one mind. There's one intelligence functioning universally all the time. And it begins in perfection.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm really listening, I'm one with that idea from its source. I may have a lot of points of view about how it could be expressed.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm listening to the idea itself is going to tell me what the pros and cons are.
Right.
And it won't ever be personal, not with me, not with whoever's stating the idea or putting it forth. And from that standpoint, there can be a lot of good discourse, a lot of good discussion. When somebody's not interested in another point of view, that's called a closed mind.
Right.
And then you're talking.
Can you actively be practicing metaphysical science and have a closed mind?
Well, it interferes with your practice.
Yeah, because at that point, wouldn't you be considering yourself as...
That's when your personality is intruding.
Yeah.
On your freedom.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of what Stephen Covey said back years ago when I read that book, which is seek first to understand.
Yep.
And that would remind me to, be curious.
Yep.
And not just attack or state, but if there's some curiosity there, well, why do people think something that I know to be patently false?
Well, a lot of times it's a wake-up call to broaden their information source.
But it's not a wake-up call to them. They're very clear that it's true what they believe. They're not having a problem with it.
And if it's true, it'll hold up.
Yeah.
If it's not, it's going to be full of holes.
Right.
So I wouldn't attach it to them or to yourself.
Just an idea.
Interesting.
Right. That reminds me.
But I just want to make a little point here.
Go ahead.
If you can allow it to be, it doesn't win the day. It's just there on the fence.
Right.
If you take issue with it, you're hooked, and so is it.
Right.
And there's no freedom.
Interesting. You know what it reminded me of? Now it's gone right out of my head. It was right there. It'll come back though. But
the thing I think is valuable is to remember that things like truth, things like enthusiasm, aliveness,
joy,
friendship, love, all of those things, they are the intangibles that get stepped on when your personality interferes with your freedom.
Yeah. And how do they get, so intangibles that get stepped on, so you don't have that sense of freedom. You certainly don't have a sense of being related, because if you're at odds with people,
there's no give and take.
Say that again.
There's no give and take.
Right, because at best what you've got is, well, we'll just agree to disagree. Or you've got, well, you believe what you want, go for it. We just can't talk about this. And that's even more what you see is we just can't talk about this. And then the other thing you see a lot is just blatant name calling. Like we're all 2 years old or 6 years old. You know, and what I'm interested in is dismantling that firm grip on what it is that has the divide occur that we then perpetuate.
Well, number one, I can only live it from my point of view.
Yeah.
So I have to be clear that there's nobody over there opposing me. What there is me living myself infinitely available. And sometimes I don't want to be available to myself. And that's the personality thing.
Right.
But when I really look at the values of living, I recognize that nothing comes up by accident.
Mm-hmm.
What comes up is information. I'm informing myself on whatever. And I discover, to my amazement, how much I never had heard of before. And so I have to be willing to say, oh, how about that? Ah, all right. On we go.
Mm-hmm.
And so on. Because actually, there isn't anything out there opposing me. That's the way it looks. It's not the way it is. It's only that way in my experience if I live it that way.
Right. And I would live it that way if I get attached to the way I think it ought to be.
Yep.
Because that would hold it firmly
yeah.
in place.
Yep. And that's personal.
Yeah. Yeah. Rather than idea.
Yeah.
So we've got this concept.
It limits your freedom.
Say that again.
It limits your freedom.
Right. So we've got this idea, and then we've got personal. It's something with me personally. I believe I have an opinion, I have a belief, I have a judgment, whatever. And then I'm not any longer, as soon as I buy into that, I'm not any longer idea conscious.
That's right.
Okay. And if any of you watching have any questions at all, just type them into the comments box, into your comments on either YouTube or Facebook. We'll get them here and we'll be able to add those into the conversation. And we would love that. So if you have any questions about this, any issues around communicating with people when you don't agree, how do you really have the civil discourse rather than just saying, okay, fine, let's just keep that off limits? Because one of the other things in scientific metaphysics, Betty, that I want to look at is you say, there are no no-nos.
Right.
And if there are no no-nos and we're living true to scientific metaphysics, why would we start to take things off the table in terms of what we would allow any conversation about?
We would stay open to, isn't it interesting, and let it work out.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of getting embroiled in the personal attachment stuff.
Right. Right.
And this is a timely thing to be talking about because we have a society that's very divided on what's right and wrong and good and bad and so on right now in this whole country. And we have an election coming up and there's a lot of stuff that gets said that's just stuff that gets said.
Right.
So if you want to remain idea conscious, you're going to let that personality stuff alone. Mm-hmm. If you indulge in it, you limit yourself and your own effectiveness.
Right.
When you can allow it to be and go right on saying there is just one intelligence, whole, perfect right now. And what it's doing is like bubbling to the surface.
Right.
You have to let it bubble up.
Yep.
You don't put a lid on it.
Right.
But you also do not attach it to yourself or to the other guy. I'm not bad and wrong for thinking whatever it is I've got going on. Neither is anybody else.
Right. That reminds me, remember the program we were in? And what got said is that we live as though this right here, who we are, like if it was this, Kim, is primary.
Yep.
And I think that gives rise to all the stuff that's going on in the world today about, I don't want my personal freedom impinged on. Why should I have to wear a mask? You know, all that kind of dialogue, because we think this is primary.
Mm-hmm.
And what came up in that was that really there's conversations, and conversations give human being. That human being is actually tertiary, not primary.
Yep.
There's the being and the consciousness that gives rise to conversations from which, and I think this is right, from which human beings dangle. In other words, you know, and I remember this because of the visual that it created in my head around it, and the whole premise was we're made up by the conversations in which we participate in, but that a lot of times we will attach ourselves or start to spout a conversation that's not uniquely ours. It's just a conversation that's having us, that's using us as the mouthpiece, if you will.
Yeah, and all conversations have us.
Say that again.
All conversations have us, unless we free them up.
Yeah.
Unless we're seeing idea, we're being had.
Right. Right.
So your listening wants to open to an idea.
Yeah.
And be willing to look at it.
Right.
Because, it's the closed off stuff that has it persist.
Yeah.
All that resistance just has it hang on and hang on and hang on until finally we let it alone. And when we let it alone, it's gone.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost, there's this willingness and this curiosity that allows things to be.
Yeah.
And when you're in it, you know, the conversations, when you're in the conversation and there isn't a sense of me or a sense of you, it's just the conversation that we're in. I think that's when it gives rise to original creation of conversation that arises inside of the conversation being had. Does that make sense? Like it just comes up. I have that experience more often than I think sometimes, where it's like, where did that come from? Wow, it was exactly what needed to be said, but oh my gosh, like I didn't go to the conversation ready to say it. I didn't even know it was something that needed to be said.
Yep.
You know what I mean? But it's
your listening will give that to you because it's there to be said.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you're going to listen and hear it.
Right.
You know, it's always there to be said.
Yeah.
Actually.
Right.
So I'm just hooked on this new view I've gotten of listening.
Okay.
Because it's a whole lot more than just being silent.
Right.
It's a whole lot more than just trying to put sense to what somebody else looks like they're saying to you.
Yeah.
Listening is listening for idea.
Yeah.
It's listening to the fundamental fact that's coming to light, looking like somebody's speaking.
Yeah.
And you don't attach it to them or to yourself. You just say, wow, that's an interesting idea. And then a whole lot more comes with the idea, because ideas are whole and complete. And it's the listening that brings it out in human living.
Right. So that when I'm open and I'm listening there for idea, what occurs to me is that, let me get the words right, but what occurs to me is that things could really open up, like empathy and identification with one another. And when that's occurring, the person that you apparently are in the conversation with feels heard.
That's right.
Because you're not listening.
Well, they're one with it.
Right. You're not listening to respond like a boxing match. They said this and I'm going to say that. it's not like that. It's a different kind of generative listening is what I think you're talking about.
Exploring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's super powerful when you can really listen for the ideas being said. I think we could really have a hope of a civil discourse, a generative discourse.
Yeah, and the thing that science gives us that to me is very helpful is I don't have to persuade anybody about anything because the idea is complete.
Yeah.
I have to be a better listener because the more I listen, the more it opens up. It's like a flower.
Right.
And I say, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh yes. Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
Right.
And it keeps coming and it grows and it grows. And it stops the minute you say, well, I don't like that. Because it isn't for I like, I don't like. It's for, oh, it's an idea.
Yes. Yeah. And Ken says, this is a great discussion. And then he asked a question and then he said another comment that said, got it. Listening to the idea.
Mm-hmm.
So that's great. Thank you for the comment. And anyone else who has a comment or anything that goes with this, any questions, please bring them up. Please type them in because this is exactly what I think is calling for a breakthrough right now is the ability to have conversations with people that don't agree with our particular point of view. And how do we do that?
And it is an agreement that I'm after anyway.
Right, exactly. Because if you're
anybody to agree with me, I just want to explore.
Yeah, if you're listening for the idea, then anything could arise inside of that that's bigger and better than anything you came to the conversation with.
Yeah, the gal that was on in the discussion with Margaret about listening, she was somebody that was well informed on communicating, and she said, she said, I think about listening, and I think there are empires to be explored that we have only barely touched.
Yeah.
And I loved her terminology because you could just see how huge it could be.
Right.
And when we get personal, when I want Betty's point of view, I can recognize right away that something turns off over there because nobody cares what Betty's point of view is, but everybody loves to explore an idea.
Right.
And they see something new for themselves.
Yeah. And
they find out what it takes to let go of the Betty and be present to looking at the idea.
Right. Well, and I'll say that listening in that way is generative.
Yeah.
And that's why, because you've got creation occurring there rather than rote recitation.
Or tradition. And now that word tradition really, it just haunts me because I can just see when you're really up to pushing for tradition, you're willing to be dominated by somebody that's dead,
Right.
And I thought, oh my gosh, what an image that is.
Right.
So you can you look at something and you've done it because it's always been done for 20 years. Yeah. You hear about that and you think, well, okay, this is the end of that one. Because I'm willing to listen for whatever new might be coming up. And it's always coming up.
Right.
It's always all around me. I just want to be listening for it.
Right. And not a listening like, no, not that. No, not that. Next. No, not that. It's more of so what's the idea? Wow, isn't that interesting?
And really? And oh my.
Yeah, so a combination of beginner's mind, combination of what would be called beginner's mind, listening for the idea. I mean, what are all the other ways to say it? But really, if you can divorce yourself for a minute or just set your opinions and judgments and all that aside, what is right and all that, set your righteousness aside and start to listen for idea, what might arise in the conversation. And I think that is a powerful idea.
Yeah.
So if there's anything to say about that, next time you're in one of these conversations, is put all that stuff aside and start listening actively for the ideas.
Yeah.
And get curious and start to really listen there and see what opens up. Just try it on, see what happens.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
it's
anything.
Very, very exciting to be able to, and to be in a situation exploring ideas with somebody that's also open is very exciting.
Right. So there's another question from Brad asking, does listening equate to acknowledgement?
No, I think acknowledgement might recognize listening, but listening is a quality of being that's standing on the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have an opinion, and it doesn't have a thing that it's hanging on to that it wants to pin something on. It's like wide open, full of holes, and you just going in and out of the holes, looking at everything, saying, oh my gosh, you know. I just think about it sometimes, like suppose I had an open sleigh ride through the stars with no road, you know.
Right.
And no stop signs, and every place I go is a hole to go through.
Yes.
It's amazing what's available. You know, the thing that I look at when I try to get down to both feet on the ground and all that sort of thing is I think about things like transportation and all that we've been living through the centuries with transportation. And yet way back a couple of hundred years ago in Shakespeare's time, he said, we will think the place where we would be. And we are coming to that.
Yeah. There's a couple more comments that are really good here. So Ken and Brad are very active. This is awesome. So Ken says, give an example. So for example, listening to someone with a horrible opinion. And then he says, what idea am I listening to? So it's not a listening to an idea, it's listening for the idea present in what's being communicated. So if there's a difference of opinion, and I just had a conversation with one of my best all-time friends in my life that I've known pretty much all my life, and we have very different opinions about current things happening. And so in looking at it, I can see that if I set, and we agreed that this winter we would get together over a glass or a couple bottles of wine and explore and really explore the thinking that each one's bringing to all of that. And so the thing for me there is love is present. And then there's this idea like, okay, I know you to be an amazing thinking human being who's incredibly bright. And I have no idea why you would believe that. So there's got to be an idea there being expressed.
Yeah.
So when I go to look at it, the idea being expressed is one of freedom, free will, open markets. Like there's this whole thing going on there, like, oh my gosh, there could be, you know, we might descend into some other, you know, where our total capitalistic system goes crunch in the night. Do you know what I mean? Like stuff like that, which I can't even imagine, right? And here I am on the other side of this. So it's just, it's kind of interesting. It's like, okay, so say more about that. So I'm kind of looking forward to the dialogue that's going to explore this.
Yeah, and the thing that you need to be open to when you tackle stuff like the existing economic situation or any of that stuff, you have to be open to what's possible if that didn't exist. Because you're coming from concept-free being. You know, like before there's a concept, before anybody thought of capitalization, what was there?
Right.
Before anybody thinks about money and cryptocurrency and all that stuff. What is the idea going on?
Right.
That stuff show up.
Right.
And it's that idea that's looking to expand that has this, what looks like yin yang going on about the way it looks right now.
Right.
So you really want to get to the original idea and leave the other stuff on the table. That's the way it's been looking. What else? What else?
Right.
What else is possible?
And I think inquiry and curiosity help that listening for the idea. So you're not listening to an idea. It's not a listening to, it's a listening for. It's a whole different generative way of listening, because what you're doing is you're listening beyond what's being said.
Exactly.
What's actually being communicated.
Yep.
And what's really
the thing you need to know is that the nature of perfection, which is fundamental to existence, the nature of it is that there's no language that shows it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And each piece of language, if I can put it that way, that shows up is just a step. And it's like, what more? What else? What next?
Right.
And you can't stop.
Right.
Because the idea won't stop. And when it looks like it's being held in place, you're going to have war.
Yeah.
If you don't have war, you're going to have floods. If you don't have floods, you're going to have pandemics.
Right. And on it goes.
Yeah, because ideas are not going to stop.
Right. Right. Well, that's about, we're at the end of our time. So is there anything else you want to say? Are there any other questions that anyone wants to pose? Because we're pretty much at the end of our half hour.
Already?
So, yeah, I know. It's great. So the whole thing here is listening. That's the key to the whole deal, is listening for the idea. Set your opinions, judgments, beliefs aside and listen for the idea emerging and being
not only for it, but to it.
Yeah.
Listen to the idea. What's it saying?
Right. Well, listen for it, because a lot of listening to it, you're listening to language that you don't agree with, and it gets you caught again. So I really like the distinction of listening for the idea, the idea behind what's being said.
Yeah.
You know, that because it's transparently there if you're open to hearing it.
Yeah.
So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much. We'd love all your comments and thoughts. If you like this conversation, thumbs up, a little heart. Awesome. And
send ideas if you want other things discussed. We just have fun doing this.
Right. And we do this every Wednesday at 7 o'clock Central and 5 o'clock Pacific. And we'll see you next week. Until then, listen for the idea. And don't forget to vote.